Hello, all, and welcome. Thank you for joining us at the BRICS Academic Forum 2021. This is a session in which we will be discussing a possible BRICS framework for green energy, trying to discover how the BRICS countries can work on the energy transition within their own countries and with for the broader emerging world. We have a very distinguished panel of contributors from all the BRICS countries joining us in this for this session. The way that we're going to do this is that I'm going to ask each of our participants to speak first, to give us a short discussion of a short speech on how they view the future of the energy transition in their countries and for the BRICS in general. And then maybe I will ask them one or two follow-up questions and hope that the conversation becomes more general. Once again, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to start by asking Professor Xu Xinhua, who
Hi.
is joining us from China, and she is the Vice Dean of the National Academy of Development Strategy, the Professor of the School of International Studies, the Director of the Center for International Energy and Environment Strategy Studies at the Renmin University of China. Dr. Xu, could you start, please? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. I give my appreciation to the Observer Research Foundation for organizing the BRICS Academic Forum. It is my great honor to speak on this forum. And my speech today topic is Perspectives of the BRICS Science and Technology Cooperation and Innovation in the Field of Green Energy. The first point, I would like to briefly introduce the current situation of BRICS Green Energy Scientific and Technology Innovation Cooperation. At the present, the BRICS countries have promoted cooperation in science and technology through the signing of cooperation initiative, the development of cooperation projects, people-to-people exchanges, and personnel training with other countries. On the basis of common interests, the BRICS countries actively promote cooperation in the field of green energy technology and innovation through platform of BRICS mechanism, enhance their own energy security, strengthen their independent innovation capabilities, and increase their international voice. From 2007 to 2016, China participated in the construction of 190 BRICS international cooperation bases. From 2007 to 2015, China participated in 665 BRICS scientific and technology cooperation projects with a total investment of 2.729 billion yuan. Specific priority areas of cooperation include new energy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. In the field of solar energy, China and India are two of the world's top 3 countries for new installed capacity. The potential for solar power in India is huge. Its lighting conditions are significantly better than those in China. Compared with domestic products in India, China's products have lower prices and higher quality. China and India can strengthen cooperation in the field of solar power. Russia, Brazil, and South Africa are also important regions for the international cooperation projects. In terms of hydropower, the BRICS countries are rich in such resources. Chinese enterprises have maintained close cooperation with Russia, Brazil, and other countries in the field of hydropower. At present, the great potential of hydropower in BRICS has not been fully developed. In addition, the Asian and African wind energy markets are growing rapidly. BRICS can strengthen cooperation, communication, and consultation in hydropower and wind power to further expand the relative market of BRICS countries. Secondly, I would like to talk about the progress made in green energy. The BRICS countries have made positive progress in the field of green energy, which is a fruit of building consensus and comprehensive implementing the requirements of sustainable development. The similarity of economic and social conditions and the consistency of sustainable development goals among BRICS countries determine the necessity and the possibility of cooperation in the field of green energy. On a broad basis and in a wide range of ways, BRICS cooperation has played an important role in the field of global sustainable development and achieved remarkable results. Solar energy has become the fastest growing renewable energy in the BRICS region, and it is expected to continue to grow in the future. There is also a large increase in wind energy. The Asian and African market is developing rapidly, just as I referred before, and the BRICS country has great potential for wind energy development also. The Chinese government gives priority to the development of non-fossil energy and vigorously promotes the substitution of green energy for fossil energy. We allocate projects to market competition, which enhances innovation ability and reduces costs. In recent years, the scale of China's development and utilization of green energy has expanded rapidly. Technological innovation ability and core competitiveness have also been continuously improved. China is transforming to the mode of technology independence. For now, China's green energy industries have become the world's leading industries. Most of the key equipment in solar manufacturing is domestic made. China's hydropower industry has begun to surpass the world's advanced ones in science and technologies. Wind power has become a power source with mature technology with low cost. In the past 30 years, the price of wind power equipment has been reduced by more than 70%. The last one point I would like to say, the prospects of the scientific cooperation and innovation on green energy among BRICS countries are very bright. Compared with developed economies, the overall scientific and technological level of BRIC countries is still relatively low, and the internal cooperation space has not been fully explored. Meanwhile, China has advantages in green energy technology, which can help BRICS countries establish more in deep cooperation with each other. While speeding up independent R&D on green energy technology and enhancing its core competitiveness, China is willing to conduct joint R&D with relevant research institutions of BRICS other countries. This will not only encourage Chinese green technology energy companies to go global, but also give full play to the advantages of all the other countries in this region. BRICS green energy cooperation is complementary. The technological advantages of BRICS countries are not all the same, and the technological level of BRICS countries also varies greatly. In the course of BRICS scientific and technological cooperation, countries can draw on each other's strengths in light of their respective stages of technological development and characteristics. There are also significant differences in scientific and economic development levels among BRICS countries. The differences among countries, on one hand, restrict the level of BRICS cooperation. On the other hand, they also determine the differences in the ways and the areas of BRICS cooperation of priority. By adopting scientific and technology cooperation means suitable for different BRICS countries can give better play to their scientific advantages and improve the efficiency of cooperation. In the future, we would grasp the opportunity, meet the demand of each individual member country, carry out bilateral cooperation with specific countries in specific fields in an appropriate way, and actively participate in multilateral cooperation. As we all know, China aims to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. Under such a trend, it will strengthen academic exchanges among green energy researchers and promote joint research on green energy technologies on the basis of the BRICS Organization for Science and Technology Cooperation. Also, China is ready to advance core green energy technologies to the world by transforming its core scientific and technological competitiveness into economic returns in the industrial trade. China is willing to make its core technologies truly available to BRICS countries and to enhance their capacity for sustainable development in an all-round way. Thank you. Moderator, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhruv, and particularly, I was particularly interested by your remarks on the possibility of technology transfer, and maybe we'll come back to certain aspects of that, of those points that you raised later in the discussion. I'd now like to move to Mr. Vasiliy Chuboksarov, who is Director of Research at the Competence Center for Energy Technology at Development at the Ministry of Energy of the Russian Federation. Mr. Chuboksarov, please do go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for invitation. Yes, so Russia, as the one of the key players on the energy markets, are looking at the what's going on in the world in terms of green energy, energy transition, and clean energy initiatives, and also adopting our own strategies. So several documents were recently adopted. One of the main is the energy strategy to 2035 and the security doctrine of Russian Federation. These two documents pay great attention to the clean energy sources and development of clean energy technologies. So we define more than 600 technologies that are now in place in the world, which can be used either to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions according to the obligations of international documents such as the Paris Agreement, or to even reduce it lower for the net zero scenario. But a lot of these technologies are either not ready for big production, so for the to reduce a vast majority of greenhouse gases, or either too expensive at the moment. And the first thing we're looking at is the abatement costs of the technologies. And from these 600, we define about 45 technologies that we can adopt now and start now, and work on others with the scientific technology development and the international cooperation. So the first block we're looking at our main consumers of energy sources is hydrogen technologies, and we're looking at not only the green hydrogen, so-called green hydrogen, but also blue hydrogen, because as I said, the abatement costs and the so the cost of green hydrogen is not as good as it should be at the moment. And but blue hydrogen technologies are known in the world from the past century, and it is safe and clear. But what's important is the carbon capture technologies and usage that are not really well developed at the moment for the big manufacturers. So, for example, the only Europe demand, according to Europe energy strategy, will be about 10 million tons of hydrogen. If we assume that there is such a plant which can produce such an amount, there is no technology for this amount of CO2 at the moment. So that's where all countries, and on the platform of BRICS countries, we can work together and to create the pilot projects that we can test as other international partnerships are doing at the moment. So if we're talking about the technology development, it takes about from 10 to 15 years to create a technology from scratch for one particular player. And if we're talking about international financing and research and development cooperation, we can have this time to like 5 to 7 years for the big implementation. As on the basis of BRICS research centers, there is a discussion that is going on in terms of mutual interests of the countries in terms of technologies, and there is a possibility to create the research groups for such initiatives. So we would like to see that's going on as the part of the cooperation. So yes, talking about the clean energy, the technology side is really important, but the other side is the regulation side of things, because a lot of countries are developing their own regulation documents on what to count the greenhouse gases, or how to count them, or how to monitor them. So it is good to like make like common standards for if we're talking about cross-border taxes in some countries, or we're talking about the monitoring system. It is good to create the common regulations that or common rules how we count and what we count on greenhouse gases, or even to create the united system of monitoring and mitigation of risks. And also as part of Paris Agreement and the Earth Day Agreement that was in last century, there is also discussion on the trade of greenhouse gases between amounts between the countries, between the developing countries. But at the moment, there is only discussion within each individual country, how the companies within the country will trade their greenhouse gas emissions. But as the union, the BRICS takes more than 50% of forests or the land. So it's quite important to have also the common rules and regulations in this sphere. So I think I pointed out the main observations that we're doing at the center at the moment, and which we are thinking at the moment in Russia. So if something that I've said is common to your countries, yes, we welcome you for the partnership in these spheres.
Thank you, Mr. Chuboksarov, and I found that was actually very enlightening. In particular, efforts that are underway to try and essentially count carbon, and you didn't mention it directly, but we're all thinking about the EU's possibility of a carbon import tariff and how we're going to manage to figure out our exports in that context. But you also made a very important point, I think, about global carbon trading and trying to figure out norms and metrics that would help that happen. And as you correctly pointed out, the BRICS countries have over half of the world's existing forest cover. And when it comes to carbon trading and afforestation and offsets, I think we're going to be setting the terms there. So there is a great deal of possible cooperation, particularly in the metric side of things. And I thank you for highlighting those issues. I'm going to shift now to South Africa, to Mr. Chris Chetty, who is joining us from South Africa, and Mr. Shetty is Chief Researcher at the Inclusive Economic Development Division of the Human Sciences Research Council of South Africa. Mr. Shetty, I'm glad you're here, and I hope everything is well in South Africa. We've been reading the news and we're all very worried, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair. It's my great privilege to be here. I'm calling you from Cape Town, so things have been quite okay on this side of the world. My colleagues in the Gauteng province and elsewhere have been undergoing quite a lot of difficulties. For my contribution today, I'd like to talk about green energy cooperation models which can be introduced in the BRICS countries. In essence, when we discuss the need for knowledge sharing and cooperation, this is a well-accepted position in the BRICS group going back to about 2009. So we support the idea. And so our research there, from our perspective, needs to shift to unpacking the modalities of knowledge exchange and cooperation. If we can build closer ties, we expect we'll be able to accelerate our transition away from fossil fuels, reduce our emissions, and then move to renewable energy dependence. And a key vehicle for developing these partnerships is the BRICS Energy Research Cooperation Platform. This platform must be expanded, in our view, to include contributions from local governments and the private sector via renewable energy associations and academia. To facilitate these engagements, we also call upon the consulate officers in the cities to drive partnerships for this knowledge creation. As I mentioned, the BRICS have long supported the idea for knowledge sharing, and this dates back to the first BRICS summit in Russia in 2009. And if we consolidate these views, the BRICS Energy Research Cooperation Platform was announced then at the 2018 Johannesburg summit. And this institution was tasked to drive sustainable development, promote sharing advanced technology, expand cooperation programs in the education space, and create linkages across institutions and forums such as this one. And these engagements are then supposed to be facilitated by the BRICS ministers of energy, but in our view, they need some support at the local level. And so to give a quick overview of the different renewable energies, the BRICS Energy Research Cooperation Platform produced the 2020 report, and that identified various strengths and areas of exchange. And if we consider the spectrum of renewable energies, the report identifies which countries can contribute in which areas. So for example, as we were discussing earlier in the solar space, China is perhaps the #1 producer of solar energy and these components that are needed in the photovoltaic systems. And so the other BRICS countries definitely will benefit from their knowledge in this space. In the wind space, we know from this report that Russia is in need of gearboxes for turbines, and India has very strong manufacturing processes which could benefit them. Similarly, in the lithium-ion battery space, South Africa produces a vast amount of raw materials which are needed in these batteries, and the report mentions how Brazil and India are both keen to expand their storage capacity. So across these fields, the report is giving us this high-level overview, but we need to be able to identify where these opportunities lie and also identify the stakeholders who are most appropriate to lead the work in this space. And in our view, the renewable energy associations in each of the BRICS are the ideal entry points to engage with the relevant actors responsible for innovations in these spaces. These institutions are nonprofits, and they work to support their network of members, many of whom are fledgling businesses that are vulnerable to policy and market changes. And these member organizations come from the private sector, but some are also from academia, and some could be affiliated to national regulators. And so they have deep insights about the local market and possible opportunities, but these members, they guard their intellectual property and they understand its value to their continued operation. So it is the association that can then act as a buffer and protecting their interests while also facilitating knowledge exchange and in some instances, perhaps guiding policy development. So these are the ideal actors to be included within the Energy Research Cooperation Platform. By including these associations and the consulate offices into the Energy Research Cooperation Platform, one has a better opportunity for us to build trust amongst these vulnerable startups and innovators. They value their capital, their intellectual capital, and they need to be protected. And so it's very key for us to be introducing systems which build trust. And then the consulate officials, they have a key role to play in this, acting on behalf of their sectors. They can help us address issues of language and cultural exchanges, which are key for us to overcoming those first initial barriers which limit trust building. Thereafter, we see the Energy Association can help us set up dialogues which relate to the regulatory framework, or also give us insights about the local market and what resources are available to be shared. And while doing that, they also can then protect the innovator while sharing information in a more respectful manner. And by engaging these institutions, we believe the cooperation platform will be better placed to develop constructive partnerships. So in closing, we believe it's essential for the research cooperation platform to be further expanded to include these associations and local governments and academic institutions. The international relations ministries of the BRICS have a key role to play here to facilitate these partnerships, and via their consulate offices, they can identify strategic partners who are interested in entering into international partnerships. These offices can also take the lead in promoting dialogues, knowledge exchange programs, and developing a research agenda which can be located at the local level. And lastly, to facilitate these objectives, funds are key. So we call upon the New Development Bank to also make some funds available which can nurture the creation of knowledge partnerships, which could be perhaps accessed via our consulate offices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chetty. I found, again, those are very illuminating remarks, and I think they were very targeted at exactly what we need to do in order to increase the technology transfer that was talked about earlier, particularly the build-up of trust in intellectual property, which I think is a vital pre-component of that happening. Our next speaker will be Professor Luciano Losekann, who is an associate professor at the Universidade Federal Fluminense in Brazil. Professor Losekann, if you could give us your initial thoughts, and then we'll come back to you maybe with some follow-up questions later.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Regarding the BRICS, Brazil has a different situation. We know that the energy transition is different from every country, and for the BRICS is particularly different. The start point of the countries are very different, and some countries in the group have an energy mix that has a large participation of fossil fuels. In Brazil, it's very different, and renewable is already a predominant source of energy. First, Brazil has a historic large share of hydropower and electricity production. It was in the past around 80–90% of the electricity produced in Brazil. Nowadays, it's around 60%. But as the new renewable increased a lot their role in Brazil as wind power and solar power, now we have our energy mix for electricity that 85% of the electricity produced in Brazil is renewable. That is a differential. Consider other countries, not only in BRICS, but also for OCDE countries. And what you see now in Brazil, that wind power and solar power are very competitive, are very attractive. The solar power is experimenting a huge development in distributed generation, in wind power. In the last auctions of electricity was the most competitive, most attractive source for on those auctions. So the perspective for these two sources are very positive. And biofuels, Brazil has a long tradition with ethanol, so it substituted gasoline in the past, and it still has a large participation. And when we sum up all those sources, we have a starting point that is very positive. So the challenge for Brazil is the next steps, and what we see in Brazil that those sources are competitive. Biofuels are still competitive, and wind power, solar power, and from my point of view, when we consider new technologies as hydrogen, Brazil has advantage to develop those projects as renewables potential are very strong in the country. So we are in a position for a different way for the transition. I think from my point of view, renewable for the future, you will still have a large participation, and you'll be competitive in the future.
Thank you, Professor Losekann, and thank you for reminding us that Brazil has a long history of success with renewables. And if we have an opportunity, I'm going to come back to you with some follow-up questions about that history. But first, I would like to turn now to my colleague Vidya Pal, who is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. Ms. Pal?
Between 1990 and today, India's GDP has increased sixfold, but its energy use increased only by 2.5 times. And there were three factors behind this. One, as I mentioned, is the shift away from biomass. Biomass, as you know, is very poor in energy consumption. When the share of biomass decreased from about 42% in 1990 to about 20% today, this substantially increased India's energy use to produce 1 unit of GDP. The second factor is a structural shift towards service sector, which does not consume much energy. 90% of value added in 1990 and today came from low energy intensive activities such as retail, banking, business, and so on. This may not be replicated in other countries, but this has been a significant factor in India. The last one, which everyone talked about, is technology. Energy cost of India in industry is very high. In fact, energy use in industry, particularly electricity, is very high for industries, because it cross-subsidizes electricity consumption by households. Since the energy price is very high, many industries, high energy intensive industries like steel, cement, and other industries have shifted away from expensive energy. They've used technology to reduce energy consumption. So in this high energy use sectors like steel and cement, India has cutting edge technologies, and this could be an area where countries can cooperate. Now I'll come back to cooperation between the BRICS countries, which has been talked about. In terms of R&D, I think India's focus is on solar, because India's bet for the future is solar. By 2030, India wants to have at least 450 gigawatts of renewable capacity, out of which solar will be dominant. And as you may be aware, India has this International Solar Alliance, where India aims to connect the entire world with one grid and one sun, one grid. That is the concept underpinning International Solar Alliance. BRICS could be one area where we can try this out. I'd also like to turn to some of the issues that the Chinese and Russian colleagues raised. First is the value chain nationalism and renewable energy in India. Mihir will definitely be aware of this. India is now launching schemes to uh, reduce import of solar and other equipment from other countries, primarily China, and incentivize local manufacturing. So we have recently launched performance-linked incentives, PIL, for solar and other manufacturing. I would just like to ask my colleagues from the BRICS countries uh, if this has been a success in your countries, if you have tried, and whether it's a good strategy. The second issue for the cooperation is whether we should use markets or mandates for increasing the share of renewable energy. India has primarily used mandates through auctions and tenders, which means the cost of integration of renewable energy is socialized. I don't know if any of the BRICS countries are using the market mechanism, and if so, how are costs accommodated? Uh, the Russian colleague spoke about hydrogen. I think there is a case for hydrogen in India, but since we are a coal-dominant country, coal still accounts for about 75% of our generation. I think in the last month it accounted for 80% because of sudden increase in demand. Uh, Many people have discussed coal gasification, that is brown hydrogen, uh, as a means to produce hydrogen. I think Russia is a pioneer in this area, gasification of coal to produce hydrogen. That would be an area where we can collaborate. Another issue which the BRICS colleagues will have some insights on is the use of local players. I think the colleague from South Africa spoke about it. Today, we are dominant players in the renewable energy sector, particularly solar, are international players, very large international players, who have almost completely driven out small domestic players, primarily because the international players have access to low-cost finance. Because cost of finance is a very important factor when you bid for projects. Lower tariffs is a very key determinant of success in the auctions. And this has meant that local players are almost eliminated in the solar sector. Whether this is a strategy, especially South Africa has tried in terms of, whether this is good for increasing the share of renewable energy, but does create local jobs and so on. I think I'll stop there and we can discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Val. And there are a couple of issues that you raised there, and several of them maybe can be addressed by our colleagues on the panel. But I want to, we have about 20 minutes left, and I want to sort of go around the panel once, and I'm going to maybe push you outside some of your comfort zones and ask you about questions maybe that are a little different from what you originally talked about. Because we need to get a sense of how the energy transition is playing out in our different countries and maybe what we can learn from each other, because that is part of what the academic forum is about. And Mr. Chuboksarov, I think I'm going to start with you, actually. Our countries are very different. All the BRICS countries are very different. And many countries in the BRICS are net energy importers. But of course, matters are different for Russia, where I think the share of the fuel and energy sector, which is the ministry, the ministry that you are part of, is maybe a fifth of the country's GDP. It's 60 to 65% of Russian exports. Fixed assets of the FEC account for maybe 1/3 of Russia's production assets. And most importantly, I think maybe from the point of view of financing, 40% of Russia's budget is tied up in fuel and energy. So the question I think that many of us have is that many other oil exporting countries are nevertheless investing heavily in the green transition because they recognize it as a hedge for changing demand patterns of the rest of the world. The question I think many of us have is, how is Russia adapting to this change? How is it planning to manage the stress on state finances, for example? What are the financial constraints that Russia faces in this adaptation? And how can international cooperation play a role in managing Russia's financial approach to the green transition?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, it's a little bit tricky, but yes. So we assume that yes, the global demand in oil, maybe it's on the peak at the moment. We don't know. There are a lot of research agencies that tell us that it can drop significantly if it will go to net zero, or it will be a slight drop. But I haven't seen the reports that says that the gas demand is at its peak. At the moment, Russia gas export are more than oil, and we use gas not only for heating purposes, but to create the high marginal products. And it is a part of Russian strategy to create the gas chemistry plants and to give our consumers of even energy the high marginal products. What I was mentioning before is the hydrogen. The new opportunity is the blue hydrogen in terms of the gas use. We're looking at this perspective in particular. Yes, you're right. There should be, there will be time when we all will need to diverse our production from like natural resources to some clean sources or recycling. But how fast it will be, it will depend on all us, and I think Russia will act according to the international obligations as a part of the Paris Agreement, first of all. So we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and will contribute to our countries. So with that, we're selling the energy sources. And first of all, we will develop the technologies and work on the technology cooperation in this sphere. So I think there is like no direct answer. We will do what is need to be done for our economical growth and to meet the demand from other countries. So that's my answer to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chuboksarov, and I think that nevertheless that was very enlightening, and we understand a little bit more about Russia's strategy. Mr. Chetty, I'm going to ask you a question next, and And it's about the green transition in South Africa again and what we can learn from it, because in the transition in South Africa is particularly complicated, of course, by the fact that South Africa has a large coal sector that is embedded firmly in the economy. And we know also that there are specific political and socioeconomic factors at play, including the power of the trade unions, the larger effort towards creating a more inclusive and more equal economy. So the question I think that a lot of us have is, how is South Africa putting questions of justice at the center of its green transition, set questions of inclusion, and what lessons can the rest of us in the emerging world learn from its efforts? And once again, is there a financial constraint that is faced in this attempt at greater inclusion in your green transition?
Yes. Thank you for the question. We are a country that suffers from energy poverty. So a vast number of our population living in informal conditions access their electricity through informal means or illegal means in some instances. And so there's quite a lot of danger that people living in those conditions actually do experience. So going forward, the energy plan in the country is meant to look at how do we expand the supply of energy so that all people do have access. At the moment, we do have shortages, and that is resulting in what we call load shedding at the moment. And so our businesses are also suffering while we have these frequent power cuts. So there is a need to expand the supply. And to date, our focus has been on coal. So we need to transition away from coal, or perhaps also upgrade our coal facilities so that we aren't producing this high supply of greenhouse gases into the air. And so one initiative is to introduce carbon capture and storage systems and integrate that into our existing plants. And the other has been to try and focus on expanding the role of independent power producers, and as well as small-scale generators in the sector. But the problem that we've had to date is that we haven't really drafted a complete policy of how they should actually go about engaging local government so that they can actually start setting up. There's actually been some conflicts between the national government and the local government about what their powers actually are to be able to introduce these smaller players into the market. So we're trying to clarify what the policies should be. I think we're reaching a state where the cities are feeling more comfortable with what is available, but it then needs to be now defined at the local government level about how to start engaging with these independent power producers and also engage with them in a longer term. Well, some of the challenges we have is that we limit the contracts that we can enter into short-term periods because that's all the powers that the local government have. So we need to be able to free up those regulations so that they can invest in these bigger projects which have a longer term to realize results. So it's an ongoing problem, and hopefully we will be investing more in the renewable energies to try and promote those sectors. Thanks.
Well, and thank you for that, Mr. Shetty. And I think it's a very similar complex of problems to some that we have in India in particular, where some state governments might have differing approaches, and definitely signing longer-term contracts, even writing longer-term contracts, can become quite complex. Dr. Zhu, I'm going to turn to you for a couple of, maybe a quick comment, which is essentially, again, on the subject of development finance, because the People's Republic of China has emerged as a major financer of development projects across the emerging world. And over the past few years, development finance has moved away from high carbon projects such as coal-fired power plants to greener energy in many parts of the world. How is China's development assistance going to change to reflect the reality that the rest of the world is now more interested in green energy? And what are China's commitments to increasing the flow of green finance?
So yeah, just as you point, it is a very interesting and very important question that almost the whole world has been looking at Chinese foreign investment because what Chinese are going to do to continue its investment greener or less greener, it's really means a lot. So in my understanding that China's pledge for battle the climate change and global warming, and also our declaration of president for to reach the carbon peak before the year 2030 and the carbon neutrality before the 2060, it will of course undoubtedly keep our promise. The thing is that China has also promised never to investment in the coal plants, especially in the BRI region. We can see that the first half year of 2021, there are lots of the non-fossil fuel the energy investment along with the BRI region. That is the one thing. And the second thing is that we heard from our President Xi during our the Boao International Forum. He emphasized again that people should be very carefully in sticking on with the green energy together with the green finance, just as you emphasized a lot, and also the green infrastructure and the green transport. So what we need to, among the BRICS countries, we think that there is another thing that our understanding in green development should be inconsistent. That is what I want to share of the views that if we don't have the consistent understanding of what the green development path we should have, we don't think that the green foreign investment or green financing endeavor can really mean something. For example, that we often think about the thing that when we battle the climate change, when we reduce the carbon emission, we need to input a lot of the finance, or we need the lots of the policies of subsidies, financial subsidies, etc. So are we going to have some green development path that while we are doing the environmental protection, while we can have the human development, for example, the GDP growth also as we are satisfied with. So that is, we think that even the green financing, the way the policies should always abide by the target. That's how we can manage to do that, to transform our natural resources with green technologies, for example, the green energy, then transform it into our economic growth, especially after COVID-19. So post-pandemic, it's very, very important. So I beg your pardon to have the potential of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhu, and I think that was again a very illuminating answer. We're running a little short on time, I would like to turn to Professor Losekann next, and maybe for the next couple of minutes, if you could. We know that Brazil has an extraordinarily positive history with hydropower and biofuels. So maybe you could just very briefly explain to us how finance and innovation was managed in the past, what the role of the state was, and are there any lessons for the BRICS economies and for development cooperation among the BRICS and beyond from Brazil's experience? Just a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think it's very relevant. Actually, in Brazil, we are in a turning point because at the best, renewable source had a special treatment from the Brazilian government to get competitive, and nowadays we are experimenting a change that renewable power are already competitive, are already attractive. So the Brazilian government is considering to reduce the subsidies for renewable power, particularly solar power had a scheme for net metering that is very attractive for consumers to install photovoltaic panels. And nowadays, the net metering scheme are under review, and certainly for the future, some incentives you'll decrease. And for wind power is the same, that had these incentives in the past, and now we are reviewing it. What I think the lesson from Brazil is there is a learning process, and at the beginning it was very important to support those technologies, and nowadays it seems that they are already facing costs that are the same and are even less than other options. So from now on, it seems that the development of renewable of the wind power and solar power in Brazil, it will be on market basis. So for the future, it will not be necessary for to have subsidies for those two technologies, because they're already competitive. We have to consider that Brazil has very positive potential for wind and solar, and depending on the location is not the same. But for Brazil, those two sources, considering the costs right now, they are already competitive. And when we compare to gas power plants and other renewable sources, are facing advantages. So the lesson for Brazil is incentives, subsidies are important, and the role of the state at the beginning was very important to create the support for the new technologies. But when the learning process has already functioned, it's no longer necessary subsidies.
Thanks, Professor Losekann. And then I think that's very useful information again, that there comes a time when the market can and must take over. And we're almost out of time. So Ms. Powell, I'm going to turn to you for some closing remarks. If you can just summarize what you think we've picked up from this, and if you see a path forward.
Thank you. I think the issue that you brought up, that the transition towards green energy must be a just transition, is very important. If the BRICS countries can cooperate on how the transition can be a just transition to everybody, I think that will be answering a question that many people are not able to answer today, particularly South Africa and India, which are coal dependent, with a lot of labor which cannot be easily shifted into renewable energy or any other sector. How are we going to manage a just transition? That's very important. Another issue is India hasn't really given a peak date for coal, peaking date for coal, and it's unlikely to do so in the coming COP26. And it is unlikely to commit to net zero year 2. And the main reason is it's a very difficult thing for India to do. Among the BRICS countries, India is probably the country with the lowest per capita energy consumption and the lowest carbon emission. And this explains why it's so difficult to announce a peaking year for coal and to commit to net zero emission. I think this issue cannot be sidestepped, and I think this is something that we need to address very carefully. I think I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Ms. Powell, and thank you to all our guests. I actually could have run this for another half an hour longer because I do have further follow-ups for everyone. But one of the advantages, of course, of being online is that we can all meet so easily. One of the disadvantages is that nobody listens for an hour and a half. An hour is the longest anyone ever stays online. So, but thank you all for your comments. Thank you all for your contributions. I think you've given us a lot of ideas on how to take this forward, and hopefully something that will eventually appear on the leaders' desks when they meet later this year. Thank you all, and thank you to the audience for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And bye-bye to all.
Bye.
Bye.
Good luck.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Bye-bye.